It was about 8 months ago I started, assembled, and first gamed on this controller. CAD design was a cinch, probably took a few minutes. Assembly was also a fairly quick process, and the gaming experience made it all worth it. But like 90% of my projects, I had recorded all this footage some time ago to my in progress folder and totally forgot about it for the better half of a year. But since you clicked on this video expecting a complete video and not a rant about my procrastination, let's cover how to build this controller, and I'll show some games that this worked out amazingly for, and some other games where you're probably better off using a live crab. First up is electronics. I looked online for a few options for control boards and buttons, and even my local Micro Center had those, a control board and some buttons. In the end, I snagged a combo for $32.99 off Amazon. Of course, because I took forever to upload this video, the exact one I ordered is no longer listed, at least not by the same seller or the same brand name, which means I can't give an exact match for the link, but that's probably not an issue as there are tons of clones out there and some are undoubtedly even from the same assembly line. But also, because there's no guarantee that yours will be the exact same ones that I have, I've decided not to upload my STL files this time around, because I don't want people to print something, waste plastic, and have it not work out. Plugging in all of the cables for mine was stupidly easy, as everything was very well labeled. Now that you've got your electronics, you need an enclosure to put them in. You've probably noticed that my controllers have a seam going through the middle here, and that is because the available printers I had with some spare printer time were merely XYZ DaVinci Pros, which are limited to a 20 centimeter square, which is about 7 inchworms per bald eagle in freedom units. Overall, this controller in metric millimeters measures 250 by 145 by 43, roughly equivalent to 9.75 pickup trucks by 5.75 grilled hot dogs times 1.75 Big Macs. Because the controller needed to be split into two separate pieces, I thought about designing some tabs to snap or a couple things to slide together, but in the end I whipped out the handy dandy 3D printer pen, and with the last meter or so, about 3.2 French fries of filament off another roll, I welded the two pieces together. For bigger printers like a CR10, this would not have been necessary. So, is it worth sacrificing 10 minutes of design time? Are you going to get 10 minutes of fun from it? Most likely, yes. Using this controller to play some of my favorite arcade classics through MAME on a Raspberry Pi, I did still need a keyboard, at least for the Raspberry Pi, to insert coins, but otherwise this controller was perfectly fine on its own. Between the clickiness of each joystick movement, the tactile feedback from the buttons, and the increased, more deliberate hand movement required for each input, the experience was a lot more fun and immersive than I thought it was going to be. But arcade classics, with arcade classic controls, is the way that experience was designed to be had. Next, I loaded up some Game Boy Advance games. I did run out of camera battery due to losing myself in Fire Emblem, yet again, but I am convinced that if Game Boy Advance games had come in arcade cabinets when they launched, that would have been huge. It's like going from driving a ride-on lawnmower to getting to take the project car out to the track for the weekend. Arcade classics such as The Simpsons are very fun when you first start, but 10 to 15 minutes later, even armed with unlimited coins and seeing levels that my sister and I hadn't played before, thanks to infinite free coins, we ended up quitting about halfway through level 4, because we were bored. Most of these arcade games are not fundamentally different from one level to the next. I did play several hours of Fire Emblem, more than I meant to, and the next couple afternoons were spent playing more Game Boy Advance titles than I would care to admit in this video. If you're not much of a retro fan and you play the modern PC games as the kids do these days, titles such as Audiosurf that don't require complexity in your maneuvering are great. Even fast-paced games such as Inversus, especially in 2-player mode, absolute goldmine. Having the bros over for Smash Melee? Epic. There's a handful of other games I tried in my game library that worked well with varying degrees of success. The running and jumping in Ultimate Chicken Horse is a great example of how good arcade controls can be with multiple players. However, when you're placing items, it's pretty cumbersome, and you find that you'll sometimes overshoot or undershoot selecting things with your control stick, and it largely cancels out the fun of the rest of the game. In other scenarios like Octodad, you really do need more controls than this offers, and in games like Dirt Rally, having analog control is an absolute necessity. Now, you could technically map for other games the joystick to move the mouse, and map 4 of your buttons to WASD off a keyboard and take a stab at Shadow of the Tomb Raider, but be prepared to get stabbed. A lot. So what's the takeaway here? These retro controllers are actually pretty cheap to make on your own. Both of mine came out to about $20 a piece thanks to buying 2 sets together, and that included the 3D printer materials. These are fairly comparable to Craigslist prices of used wired controllers. As for games, single-player Game Boy Advance games are worlds better. I even did pretty well at Mario Kart DS. The larger hand movements draw you much deeper into the gameplay, and I also think some elements of the arcade being a distinct place that you went to and making every coin count do transfer over to having this at home, especially if you're playing standing up or on a stool. So for a retro emulator arcade cabinet at home, perfect. If you want to play other titles that aren't quite as old as those, it's still pretty good, and in some ways I think it's better. But I think the most fun comes from having 2 to 4 of these controllers, or just having 2 to 4 friends would be nice. But having a group together where a person who struggles with the controls but is otherwise great at the game versus someone who's never played the game but is good with arcade controls is a lot of fun. Games like Overcooked, Move or Die, or Stick Fight have such simple controls, and most of the time, no one really cares who won 24 hours later, unless, your friends are particularly vindictive. But if you had the sort of friends who would be willing to change things up, where every 3rd round you had to play with one hand behind your back, or every 10th round you used these retro controllers, that would be a pretty good game night. I'd do it. You know what you should do, though? Count the number of STL files you have on your computer. Realize that you're missing a couple, and hit up 3dpc.xyz to download some 3D designs that are free from past videos. Follow me on library.tv, like, share, and subscribe on YouTube, and I'll see you once I've sorted through all the other footage I have and finished up another project.